Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with special guest, Ashten Duncan, who's here to share with us his Nautilus award-winning novel, Journey of the Broken Vessels. What happens when a young doctor seeking purpose and healing finds himself in a town where every relationship and choice seems predestined? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. Ashten Duncan is a Native American writer, board-certified family physician, and researcher originally from Oklahoma. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology, Master of Public Health, and Doctor of Medicine from the University of Oklahoma. He completed his postgraduate medical training in the University of New Mexico, Santa Fe Family Medicine Residency Program. He has authored dozens of research articles, essays, op-eds, poems, short stories, and other pieces in publications like Scientific American. Dr. Duncan serves as core faculty for a rural family medicine residency program at a federally qualified health center. So welcome to the show, Dr. Ashten Duncan.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. It's a real honor to be able to talk about this book. It was about 9 years in the making before I finally finished the manuscript, got everything off to editing, and I'm just really proud of what it turned out to be.
Well, people are just loving this book. It's such a page turner. What inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, so the big thing that really inspired this book was being able to tell the story of what I went through with my family medicine training. I originally started the idea for this book as a story about an artist trying to capture perfection in an imperfect world. Based on my wife's work, but I never really could get traction with that idea because I was trying to tell a story that wasn't mine. And as I went through my medical training, I really started to see how all of the themes I wanted to capture in this book would really fit together. And it was a little bit funny because a lot of what I hoped to achieve was the human side of talking about healthcare, not this whole like superhero story that we often get with TV shows and movies. And it was really interesting too because I think it was right after the time that I had published this, we got the pit, which was another really, I thought, very like like deep human story that I think really showed me that we're starting to move toward that as I think as a literary and media community about really showing that a lot of people who work in the hospitals, clinics, things like that are just very much just humans trying to get through doing their jobs, trying to do them well, but also struggling with a lot of the pressures of a healthcare system that unfortunately just doesn't work very well in our country.
So, Journey of the Broken Vessels, what does that title mean to you?
Yeah, so the title of the book, it comes from a lot of the literary influences that went into this. So a lot of people, as you read it, there are some subtle and then definitely some not so subtle nods to the Divine Comedy. That was something for me when I was growing up, and specifically early in college and late in high school, where I had gotten a lot of influence in my own writing from that work. And the idea of this journey was about the idea of training and this idea of residency training that physicians have to go through. And for depending on what field you're in, this could be 3 to 5 years. For some, it's longer, if you're pursuing additional training. And it really is a time where you are very much locked in. There's not really a lot of flexibility. There are not a lot of instances where people can easily move from one training opportunity to another, which is something that's reflected in a lot of medical students as they're going through their training or going through their education and getting to the point where they're applying for residency programs. So at the beginning of this book, we're introduced to our unnamed narrator who kind of signs kind of in this red ink, this kind of like, signing in blood, to this this commitment to this training program that he's found himself in. And in a lot of ways, that's what it feels like. Even if you're really excited about the opportunity to pursue this training in your specialty of choice, there's still a lot of uncertainty. There's still a lot of fear, I would say, in what's going to lie before you. And the broken vessels piece of it, just to comment on that piece of the title, it does kind of come back to this kind of religious and spiritual meaning, but in a way where it kind of channels that idea for these ideas from the Divine Comedy into the characters that we're introduced to, because we see a lot of issues around mental health, around trauma, around even substance use disorders. And these are all themes that I wanted to reflect in that piece of people being broken vessels and not necessarily able to take on more in their lives. And without giving anything away, there is a moment in the story where we do find one of our characters who does shatter, that she was a broken vessel that could not, cope with a lot of the pressures she was under, and pays the ultimate price. And so that's where that title comes from.
Well, I know you shared a little bit about this story with us. Can you give us just without giving any spoilers, just a little bit about it and about the character?
Yeah, so we kind of had started talking a little bit about the beginning. So, a lot of where we go in the story is that after we're introduced to our narrator, we're going through the story in a first person perspective, and seeing through the eyes of this new family medicine resident who is introduced to this very very idyllic town called Freedom Bay. And a lot of the way the story progresses is around the relationships that the narrator has with other people. So very early on, we're introduced to a character who is represents definitely some people in my life, but a very very like very good-hearted, very good-spirited person who can who provides kind of a lot of support for the narrator later in the story. As we go through, we're also introduced to two other characters who become part of this four-person, social unit. I would say, they're friends together, but they're also colleagues. They're also supporting each other through these really, really trying times as they go through the rest of the story. And as things play out, we're introduced to characters who represent mentors for our narrator, who represent the people who are going to form the foundation of this really challenging experience. And a lot of the scenes that play out in the story are not entire works of fiction. I really integrated a lot of my own experiences in my training to tell the story. That's why when we get to some of the more heart-wrenching parts and we get to the more tense parts of the story, a lot of those are very real. So I wouldn't even call them pseudo autobiographical. I would say just truly like there are these autobiographical elements that come out in telling the story from the narrator. And there is a message as we get closer to the end about how we can come around from experiencing trauma, how we can come around from dealing with the pressures of our modern world, and hopefully come out on the other side a little less broken than where we started.
Well, there's so much when you really get into the medical residency part that's so vivid. I could see where this is drawn from your own personal experience.
Yes, and it's in some ways too, I think without giving anything away in the book, I think there are some parts that might seem a little, even too extreme to be real, because we kind of have, all kind of come along together in this world of medical dramas that can overplay their hand a little bit and sometimes overstate the experiences that people have. But they're there's a lot to draw on. And to give a little bit more background about myself, I did all of my training out in New Mexico. And so For some people who are familiar with the state, you may start to recognize some descriptions and some settings that actually might sound very familiar because they probably are. I will give one little teaser for people who are looking for it. There's a very specific description across an entire chapter about Taos, New Mexico, and specifically around the Taos Ski Valley. And that is something where if you're familiar with it, there will be those nods to it. But there's also a little bit of fusion with part of my culture, which is that I come from the Choctaw Nation, and so some of the scenery is also built around descriptions from my tribe, and so that is, that's definitely, something I took a lot of pride in was really pulling together not only this actual experience that I had, but also infusing it with a little bit of, my culture and the things that are really important to me outside of the work I was directly doing at the time.
I love that. I love how you were able to blend all of that together. And it really dovetails nicely with my next question I have for you because this story blends quiet realism with subtle, almost surreal elements. How did you strike this balance between the emotional and what feels like almost the ethereal?
Yeah, so the thing I wanted to do in this book, and I feel like I really put a lot of time and effort into crafting these scenes where it can feel a little jarring as you're going between them, where we go from, as you said, like these realistic set pieces into these surrealistic ones. And a lot of it is because I wanted to really focus on the showing not telling of what it's like when you feel that the ground kind of giving beneath you in terms of your own headspace. And so in a lot of ways, people will probably be able to appreciate pretty quickly how a lot of the times when we have these switches in the story, there's a very clear reason for them. And a lot of it becomes a bit more extreme as we go through the story. That we start to see things really ramping up for our narrator as he experiences more and more challenges and more trials, I would say, that really start to create these more vivid scenes for him. Some of this is captured, through the framework of dreams and nightmares, but a lot of it is not really clear, and that was very much my intent was to kind of leave you to interpret what is really happening, because there are some questions toward the end of the story about what is real anymore and what is not, and a lot of what I wanted to do in the storytelling was to make it very progressive. So that way you're on the journey with this narrator together, but also maybe finding yourself reflecting more deeply on your own experiences as you are introduced to these more surreal elements.
That I can definitely see. Your book really invites readers to dive in and explore our lives in a way that we typically wouldn't.
Right, and I really appreciate you saying that because that tells me then that what I set out to do, was accomplished. Is that you know it it's not necessarily, the most comfortable story to go through, but I think in a lot of ways we have found ourselves in recent years not really living the most comfortable lives and not necessarily having the most comfortable moments with ourselves. But what I have found, and I reflect on this too for the patients I took care of during the pandemic, and people who have been in really I would say very odd places in their lives over since about 2020. There's some beauty in that confrontation of what makes us uncomfortable, or at least what makes life more complicated than we initially thought it might be. And I, as I went about writing this, I wanted to really expose readers to that idea that we can still live within this reality where we are, really faced with a lot of challenges that make us question everything, and maybe even make us question our own beliefs. But eventually, we can come back around to having some peace, even if that peace looks very different, that we're missing people from our lives. We're not necessarily the same people as where we started, and we can come out with a lot of unique strength, because that was something that was really important for me in my training, because I did have a lot of very, very unusual challenges and a lot of moments that really pushed me to I would say close to a breaking point at times. And I did come out on the other side. And when I work with trainees today, and when I do my own work with my own patients, I can recognize the strength that's there, and that's what hopefully people can walk away from when they read that last chapter of the book, and can feel that that change that we see with the narrator go through, but also relate that to their own personal experiences.
There's definitely a strong sense of mentorship and legacy throughout your novel, especially when we look at the relationship between the faculty and the residents. Do you have a mentor that helped shape that path for you?
Yes, and I there without going into a lot of detail about their personal information, I will say that a lot of the characters that were those mentor figures were based on people that were really important to me. I think, depending on what part of my work we're talking about, I can point to sometimes, one, two, maybe even three different people that were my mentors and that really helped to shape the work I do and the way I approach my day to day. And I think one of the important characters, which I'll mention him by name, is Dr. Altamura, does show up in different ways throughout the story. And without giving away some of our ending, there's a power, because when I was going about naming his character, I like this idea of keeping to the Italian influences that were really kind of the underpinning for like a work like the Divine Comedy, but also to highlight something symbolically, because we have high wall, or the high walls of this character that when we're with a mentor that's really influential, there's this kind of protectiveness, but I would also say this feeling of being kind of larger than life. And in the story, what we find is that we see a transition within our narrator around going from somebody in training who feels like he is surrounded by people who are larger than life, to becoming someone who's very much like in that same vein as their mentors, that that you become the person you aspired to be all along. And it that experience for me was really a surreal one, not necessarily in the sense of the surreal imagery we were talking about earlier, but more just like having this feeling that, wow, this person that seemed like a giant to me, I now can look them in the eyes, that there's just someone that I can still admire, but I can also channel their example through the work I do now. And that was huge for me in my training. And in the story, I hope to, really communicate that idea of what it can, feel like for people to finally, get to that point where they're able to pay it forward and able to become the mentor that they always appreciated during their training.
Well, your book, Journey of the Broken Vessels, is such a great read. It's easy to see why it's a Nautilus Book Award winner. Where can our listeners, Dr. Duncan, connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Yeah, so if you all are interested in connecting further, I'm always, happy to, discuss things further, or to share ideas I have. So I do have a website that people can connect through, and that's ashtenduncanwriting.com. And I'm also I've more recently become a little bit more active on Instagram, so that's another place you can find me. LinkedIn, just under Ashton Duncan. These are all ways that you can connect with me, or at least to follow for updates, because there are a lot of exciting things right around the corner.
Well, I cannot wait to see what else you do next. Dr. Duncan, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
And thank you so much for having me. This was a real pleasure, a real honor, and I am looking forward to every step along the way and continuing to share my work with others.
Well, thank you, Dr. Duncan. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your Nautilus award winning novel, Journey of the Broken Vessels. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Mary Ann is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Mary Ann will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmaryann.com for more information.